The cleaning crew had already gone when I stepped into the glass lobby with a bottle of small batch bourbon wrapped in tissue paper, my heels tapping out a nervous rhythm I couldn't quiet. We were supposed to be at home with takeout and a cake Ella helped me frost. But Adrian had texted at dusk running late, sorry, the same line that had become a lullaby for my doubts. I told myself this was a kind gesture, a 10th anniversary surprise, a reminder of the way we used to laugh over nothing on sticky Florida nights, with the patio door open and the bay breathing in the dark. The elevator hummed as it climbed, and with each floor, I felt hope and hurt crowd the same small space inside my chest. When the door slid apart on his floor, the office lay in careful silence, monitors asleep, city lights bouncing off the windows like ripples of cold water. I passed the framed company slogans, integrity, accountability, trust, and found myself smiling at the irony without humor. Somewhere down the hallway, a light glowed under a door I knew by heart. And in that quiet, I caught a sound that didn't belong at work after midnight. A soft laugh, intimate and unguarded, followed by a murmur that made me hold my breath. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from tonight. Drop your city in the comments, and if stories of truth and quiet justice help you breathe a little easier, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest. My name is Claire, and I was raised by a woman who kept her house keys on a bright red ribbon so she'd never lose what opened her life. My mother taught 3rd grade and fixed hymns by lamplight. My father poured concrete in the heat and brought home sunburns and pride. We didn't have much, but the things we did have were cared for. Shoes, polished receipts, stacked in a shoebox, plans scribbled on a calendar with the patience of people who understand that time is the only wealth you can expand without a paycheck. When I met Adrian at 24, he had a grin like a promise, and ideas that outran the room. A man who could talk you into believing the next step was already under your feet. We built fast because we had student loans snapping at our ankles, rent waiting like a mouth to be fed, and a child we wanted sooner rather than later. I took the stable path and signed with a boutique agency, then freelanced on weekends, while Adrian finished his MBA, and when the numbers still didn't bend, I opened the envelope my grandmother left me and used part of it for a down payment on a house with a tired lawn and good bones. He called it our launchpad, and I believed him. I believed a lot of things, including that a team sometimes means you sit the bench for a stretch so the other person can take the shot. After Ella was born, I turned down a promotion with travel, telling myself I'd circle back when she was older. And Adrian kissed my forehead and said we were building the same dream from different rooms. For a while, it worked the way people say, commitment does you choose and keep choosing. You fight, you return, and in between, you fold tiny socks and pay the water bill and make plans for a long weekend you cancel at the last minute. Then, little edits appeared in our routine, so small, they were easy to ignore the way a drip can teach a ceiling to forget it was ever flat. Adrian set his phone face down, like it needed rest. He joined a gym he never liked before and discovered a taste for late meetings and client dinners that somehow fell on my busiest nights with Ella's homework spread like confetti across the table. When I'd ask if everything was okay, he'd exhale through his nose and say I was reading into things, and I would feel guilty for holding on to a thread he insisted wasn't there. On our 10th anniversary, I iced a bakery cake at the counter while Ella pressed Fox stickers to the box, and the text came, sorry, another late one. I told Ella we'd save the candles for morning and packed the bourbon and an old photo of us laughing with sand in our shoes, thinking maybe the quickest way back is sometimes just to knock on the door you used to walk through together. The night air in South Tampa was warm enough to carry perfume and promises, and my stomach fluttered with that old mixture of faith and fear I never learned to separate. I parked under a streetlight, took a breath that caught halfway, and told myself I was being silly, that surprises are supposed to feel like this, like standing on a porch with your hand raised before you ring the bell. By the time I reached Adrian's floor, I could feel the quiet in my bones, the way a house feels after a holiday when the guests have gone and only the smell of something sweet remains. I followed the low hum of the building toward the glow under his door, and heard it again, laughter, a whisper smoothed by someone who isn't worried about being overheard. My hand tightened around the neck of the bourbon through the paper, and the corner of the photo frame nudged my ribs like a secret trying to get out. I stood there, close enough to see the shadow of movement under the door, close enough to smell a floral note I didn't wear, and rested my fingers on the handle while the part of me that still wanted to believe went searching for a different explanation. The knob felt cool and certain in my palm, and in that held breath. Before anything happened, I understood that whatever waited on the other side would not let me keep the life I had walked in here to save. I stood in the quiet hallway longer than I should have, my hand frozen on the door handle, the bourbon bottle pressed hard against my side. For a moment, I thought about turning back, walking away before I saw too much. But that sound, that laugh too soft for a workplace too close, pushed me forward like an unseen hand. I opened the door just enough to catch a slice of light and stepped closer. My heels muffled by the carpet, my pulse in my throat. And then the sight hit me. Adrian leaning back in his chair. Jacket off his tie loosened a smile I hadn't seen in years spreading across his face. Alyssa was perched on the edge of his desk, her short dress riding high, her hand brushing across his chest as if it belonged there, his hand gripping her thigh like it was second nature. The bourbon slipped from my grasp and rolled off the edge of the desk before crashing onto the floor, the sound sharp enough to snap them both into silence. Alyssa scrambled to her feet, tugging her dress down and stammering apologies as she darted toward the door. Adrian's face drained of color. "Claire," he started, his voice cracking. "This isn't what it looks like." I stepped fully into the office, each click of my heels echoing like judgment, and placed the framed family photo onto his desk so hard the glass cracked under my palm. Not what it looks like. My voice shook, but it cut like glass. Because it looks exactly like my husband in the arms of his assistant while I'm at home, raising our daughter. The slap came before I realized I'd lifted my hand, the sound sharp in the hollow office. His cheek reddened instantly, and his jaw locked, but he didn't speak. "You betrayed me," I hissed low, aware of the shadows of his co-workers gathering outside phones, lifted eyes wide. "And now you get to feel what it's like when your life collapses in front of everyone." I grabbed the photo again and hurled it against the wall, the frame shattering into pieces, the image sliding to the floor. Silence swallowed the room. Adrian looked stunned, broken even, but I didn't wait for words that meant nothing. I turned, walked past the onlookers, and didn't look back until the elevator doors closed in front of me. Inside that small box of steel and light, I whispered to myself what he would never forget, he'd regret ever thinking he could do this to me. When I first met Adrian, I was 24 and barely keeping my head above water. Fresh out of college, buried in student loans, I worked 2 jobs writing copy during the day, waiting tables on weekends. Adrian was in grad school, then full of grand ideas and easy charm. He made me believe we were building a future together, a life where bills would just be numbers and vacations were part of the plan. In those early years, I poured everything into us. I picked up extra shifts so he could focus on school, stretched the little inheritance my grandmother left me so he could walk into interviews in suits that made him look like he belonged. He called me his partner, his anchor. I believed him with all my heart. When Ella was born, I thought we had made it through the hardest years. I gave up a promotion to stay home with her longer, believing him when he said, "We're a team. I'll carry us until you're ready to go back." But when I was ready, he found reasons for me not to. He told me Ella needed me more, but what he really needed was to play the part of tireless provider while I stayed invisible in the background. I let the red flags slide, the sudden gym membership, the trips that fell on weekends, the way his phone was always face down on the counter. Each time I asked questions, he turned it back on me. Don't you trust me? After everything I do for this family, I'd shrink into myself ashamed for even asking and swallow the suspicion like poison. The night of our 10th anniversary wasn't the first crack. It was just the one I couldn't ignore anymore. Weeks earlier, I had caught a glimpse of the truth without meaning to. Ella was curled up with my phone flipping through old photos when she asked innocently, "Why is Daddy hugging Miss Alyssa in this one?" My blood ran cold as I snatched the phone from her hands. There it was, an image buried in his synced album. Adrian's arms wrapped around Alyssa in a hotel lobby, both smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. It wasn't staged. It wasn't business. It was the kind of unguarded joy I hadn't seen on his face in years. I told Ella it was just a work picture, but the lie stuck in my throat like a splinter. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every excuse, every time he'd snapped at me for asking questions came back sharp as glass. I remembered all the sacrifices, the long nights alone at the dinner table, while Ella pushed food around her plate and asked if Daddy was coming home. I told her he was working hard for us, but deep down, I knew better. The inheritance I used to buy his suits, the down payment for our home, the countless compromises, all of it was fuel for his ambition, not ours. And now, staring at that photo, I finally admitted what my gut had whispered for months. He wasn't just betraying me with another woman. He was betraying every piece of my loyalty, every sacrifice I had made to keep us afloat. By the time I walked into that office and saw them together, I wasn't blindsided. I was already standing at the edge, waiting for him to push me off. And when he did, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe before. I wasn't the one falling. He was. That night, as the elevator carried me down and the city lights blurred through the glass, I clutched the bourbon bottle's torn wrapper and the shards of the broken frame hidden in my purse. I understood the pain wouldn't vanish overnight, but something inside me had shifted. The illusions were gone, the excuses burned to ash. For the first time in years, I could see clearly, and clarity carried its own kind of strength. What I didn't know then was how quickly the clarity would harden into something sharper. The next morning, while Adrian slept soundly in the house we built with my sacrifices, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee gone cold. I wasn't going to cry quietly in the corner, not anymore. I was going to act. And as I pulled up the first bank account, my hands steady now, I promised myself he would learn what it felt like when the floor gave way beneath him. The morning after I saw them together, I woke on the couch with a stiff neck and a weight pressing hard on my chest. For a few seconds, I convinced myself it had all been a nightmare, but then I reached into my purse and felt the sharp edge of broken glass wrapped in a napkin. The frame I had slammed down in his office was still there, and the jagged reminder left no room for denial. I brewed coffee stronger than usual, sat at the dining table, and opened my laptop. Rage had burned through the fog of humiliation, leaving behind a cold steadiness I hadn't felt in years. I began moving money-freezing cards and making appointments that would change everything. Adrian still slept upstairs, unaware that his empire was already starting to crumble. When he finally returned that evening, I was waiting at the table with a stack of papers spread neatly in front of me. His face was pale, his eyes searching mine for a softness he no longer had the right to expect. "Claire, please." He started, his voice low and rehearsed. "Let's talk. What you saw, it wasn't—" I slid the bank statements across to him, the red notices clear as day. "Your cards don't work anymore," I said evenly. "Your access is gone. You want to explain something? Explain it to the cashier who just turned you away." His jaw tightened as he stared at the pages, and his shoulders squared as if he could intimidate me into folding. "You can't do this," he snapped. We're a family. This is our money. I leaned forward, steady and calm. It was my inheritance that started us, my choices that held us together, and my sacrifices that kept Ella safe while you chased your ego. You don't get to keep us and her in the bargain. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it back before his fingers brushed mine. The silence stretched long enough for the refrigerator to hum louder than either of us. Finally, he whispered, You think you're punishing me, but you're making a dangerous mistake. You'll regret this. You can't handle life without me. I laughed quietly, not with humor, but with certainty. Watch me. I closed the folder, lifted Ella's small suitcase, and walked toward the door. He tried to grab my arm, but I wrenched free his touch, leaving nothing but disgust behind. Outside, I buckled Ella into the back seat, her stuffed fox resting against her shoulder. Where are we going, Mommy? She asked, her voice small in the dusk. Somewhere better, I told her, and for the first time, I meant it. Paula welcomed us into her home with the kind of warmth that doesn't need explanation. Her guest room smelled faintly of lavender and laundry detergent, safe in a way I hadn't felt in months. That first night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint creaks of her old house and Ella's gentle breathing down the hall. My phone buzzed on the nightstand with 3 missed calls and 2 voicemails. Adrian's voice thick with false calm. Claire, call me back. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Out of hand, his way of twisting blame, of making me the problem for refusing to play the silent wife. I ignored them all. By mid-morning the next day, Paula texted me a screenshot. Adrian had tried to pay for lunch with his corporate card at a downtown steakhouse, and when it was declined, he caused a scene loud enough for people to whisper about. The cracks in his armor were widening fast. What he didn't realize was that the office already knew. My confrontation had been recorded on more than one phone, though no one had posted the video yet. Still, word spread quickly in circles like his. Paula's husband heard that Alyssa had been pulled into HR first thing that morning, the whispers too loud to ignore. She had bet her career on Adrian's promises, and now she was walking through the halls red-faced, realizing she had gambled everything for a man already slipping through her fingers. I almost felt sorry for her, but sympathy doesn't erase betrayal. She wasn't the cause, just another symptom of the disease Adrian had chosen to be. By late afternoon, his car screeched into Paula's driveway, tires crunching the gravel like he was entitled to storm wherever he pleased. He pounded on the front door until I stepped outside, Paula close behind me with her arms crossed. His shirt was untucked, his hair uncombed, his face flushed with frustration. Claire, what the hell are you doing? He demanded, his voice raw. You can't just disappear with Ella. People are talking. You made a scene in the office. Do you have any idea how this looks? I stood still, my hands calm at my sides. It looks exactly like what it is, I answered. You sleeping with your assistant while your wife raises your daughter alone. He paced like a trapped animal, his hand running through his hair again and again. You've embarrassed me. You've embarrassed us. Do you realize the damage you're doing? I stepped closer, keeping my voice low so he had to lean in. The only one who damaged this marriage is you. And if you think this is embarrassing, Adrian, just wait. This is nothing. He softened his expression, then reaching for that old mask of tenderness he used whenever he wanted me to surrender. We can fix this, he whispered. Alyssa doesn't mean anything. You know that. Come home and we'll put this behind us. I pulled back before his hand could touch me. There is no home left, I said steadily. You burned it down. I won't rebuild it for you again. Paula opened the door wider, her silent support like a wall at my back. He glared at her, then at me. His eyes filled with betrayal, as if I were the one who had walked away. Finally, he spat. "You'll regret this, Claire. You're nothing without me." I smiled then, even though it hurt. "We'll see." He slammed his car door, the tires squealing as he tore down the street, his anger filling the space he no longer controlled. Through the window, Ella peeked from behind the curtain, her eyes wide. "Why is Daddy so mad?" she whispered when I came inside. I brushed her hair back gently. "Because Daddy doesn't like losing. But Mommy isn't going to lose anymore." That night, lying awake in Paula's guest room, I thought about how quickly the ground had shifted. 2 days earlier, I was the humiliated wife, walking out of an office with broken glass in my purse. Now he was the one unraveling his power, slipping his mistress under scrutiny, his dignity fraying at the edges. For years, I had believed I was powerless, convinced that my silence was protection. Now I saw clearly his power had only ever existed because I allowed it. And I was finished allowing. When his mother invited us both to dinner at the yacht club on Bayshore, I accepted without hesitation. Not because I wanted reconciliation or even peace, but because I knew men like Adrian couldn't bear to lose control in public. They always tried to reclaim it where the lights were brightest. If he wanted a stage, I would give him one. The Bayshore Yacht Club sparkled with chandeliers and polished wood, the kind of place where whispers carried farther than laughter. I stepped through the wide doors wearing a black dress cut simple but sharp, the kind that didn't beg for attention but commanded it. The room turned in quiet ripples, faces shifting toward me as if they'd been waiting for my entrance. Adrian was already seated at a long table near the window. His parents on one side, Alyssa on the other, her lipstick too red, her posture too studied. He smiled too broadly when he saw me, the smile of a man trying to hold a mask in place. "Claire," he said, his voice pitched higher than normal. "Thank you for coming. Let's keep tonight civil for the family's sake." I slid into the chair opposite him, folding my hands in my lap, letting the silence do its work. He launched into a performance about misunderstandings, about gossip taken out of context, about how people loved to exaggerate. Alyssa nodded at every pause, her eyes fixed on him as though waiting for cues. His mother's gaze clung to me silently, pleading, while his father's jaw clenched each time Adrian tried to smooth over the truth. I waited until the waiter poured wine, until the plates were cleared for the next course, then reached into my bag. A thick envelope slid across the polished wood with a sound that cut the conversation short. Adrian froze, his hand hovering above his fork, his expression tightening as though the envelope were a live wire. "What is this?" he asked, his voice lower now, no longer meant for the whole room. "Receipts," I answered. He opened it, flipping through printouts of hotel confirmations, billed to his corporate card expense reports, marked with dinners that were never with clients, and the photo Ella had stumbled across on my phone. His face drained as the evidence stacked higher under his shaking fingers. Alyssa shifted in her seat, her hand brushing nervously over her napkin, her breath quickening. "This is slander," Adrian hissed, but even as he said it, the words carried no weight. "No," I replied, keeping my voice even, but loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "This is your life, Adrian. The one you tried to keep hidden while you told me I was paranoid." His mother pressed her hand to her mouth. His father leaned back in his chair, and a hush fell over the nearby diners. Alyssa pushed her chair back suddenly. "I don't have to sit through this," she muttered, fumbling with her purse. I caught her eyes just long enough. "Go ahead, Alyssa. Run. But remember, you weren't his first affair. You were only the one foolish enough to think he'd leave me for you." The room gasped as if the words themselves had struck. Alyssa's face flushed crimson beneath her carefully painted makeup. Her eyes darted from Adrian to his parents, then to the tables where whispers had turned to stares. She stumbled away, her heels clicking unevenly across the floor until the doors closed behind her. Adrian sat frozen, the papers trembling in his hands, unable to form words. His father's head shook slowly, the weight of disappointment plain. I leaned in just close enough that only he could hear. You built your whole life on lies, and now everyone sees you for what you are. I rose without rushing, letting each step draw the eyes of the room. The whispers followed like a tide, small forks and glasses clinking nervously in my wake. By the time I reached my car, my phone was buzzing. Paula's text glowed on the screen. Your line is everywhere. Someone filmed it. It's already online. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Adrian had tried to humiliate me in private. Now his destruction was public, carried on the screens and voices of strangers. He didn't retreat quietly. Men like him never do. Within days, he was giving interviews to business blogs, posing outside his office in tailored suits, with his jaw set like stone. Headlines framed him as a victim, a husband betrayed by a vindictive wife. He claimed I was unstable, that I had turned a private matter into a smear campaign out of spite. He even described Alyssa as a trusted colleague, painting her as nothing more than a target of my jealousy. I almost laughed reading it, but the humor never reached my chest. I didn't need to respond. The internet already had. The video of me sliding that envelope across the yacht club table had spread to every platform. Clips were stitched with captions, "Know your worth," and "Receipts don't lie." My words about Alyssa, about not being the first, only the foolish one, became a soundbite used in videos by women sharing their own betrayal stories. By the end of the week, it wasn't just gossip in Tampa. It was viral. Adrian's attempts to frame me as unstable fell apart. When the leaks began, anonymous emails releasing chains of hotel bookings billed to his company, screenshots of late-night texts between him and Alyssa filled with innuendo, each timestamp overlapping with the nights he told me he was working. Paula sent me the links before I even saw them. "It's over for him," she wrote. "They've got everything." Comment sections turned brutal. Hashtags mocking his client dinners trended while others ridiculed his LinkedIn statement. Alyssa deleted her social media accounts, but it was too late. By the end of the month, she was quietly escorted from the company with boxes of her belongings. Adrian was suspended pending review, his reputation smoldering in the wake of proof he couldn't outrun. I hadn't leaked a single thing. I didn't need to. The people who once circled around him, co-workers, so-called friends, those he thought loyal, were the very ones feeding the fire. The final blow came from a leaked recording at a company retreat. Adrian's voice, thick with alcohol, bragging about keeping the wife at home while he took care of business with Alyssa. Within hours, the audio spread everywhere, and his words turned into a hashtag that trended nationwide. He had made himself into a punchline. For years, I had been invisible in my own marriage, my sacrifices swallowed and dismissed. Now the truth was out in the open, replayed and dissected by strangers across the country. The man who once told me I was nothing without him could no longer walk into a restaurant without whispers trailing behind him. And I hadn't lifted a finger. Still, I knew viral humiliation wasn't enough. Internet outrage burns hot, but it doesn't last. I wanted something permanent, something that couldn't be spun or erased with a new suit and a different story. That meant courtrooms, signatures, judges, and money. Because men like Adrian bleed the hardest when you take away the one thing they worship most, their wealth. Helena Ortiz didn't waste time with pleasantries. She leaned across her polished desk, eyes steady, her tone brisk, but not unkind. "If you want justice, Claire, you'll need patience. This isn't a sprint, it's a demolition." I nodded, feeling steadier than I had in weeks. Her office was lined with shelves of legal texts, but it was the framed photographs of women shaking her hand outside courtrooms that caught my attention. She had built her career helping women like me walk away with more than just their dignity. For the first time since the night in Adrian's office, I felt like I wasn't standing alone. Our first hearing arrived faster than I expected. Adrian appeared in a crisp suit. His posture rehearsed, his smile thin. Across the room, he tried to meet my eyes as though we were still partners weathering a storm together. I looked back at him and felt nothing but resolve. The judge opened with financial disclosures, and that was where Adrian's mask began to slip. He listed only his base salary as if the six-figure bonuses and company perks didn't exist. Helena calmly slid documents across the table: bank statements, luxury purchases, hotel bills charged as business expenses. Each one was stamped with dates and amounts that matched his supposed client dinners. The judge adjusted his glasses, his voice firm. "Mr. Brooks, you understand, withholding information in a divorce proceeding constitutes perjury." Adrian stammered, his lawyer fumbling to frame it as clerical oversight. But the damage was done. A forensic accountant was ordered to review every detail. Watching Adrian's face pale was almost enough to soften me. But I remembered every lonely dinner, every lie that left me doubting myself. The sympathy vanished as quickly as it came. Even his family began to fracture under the weight of his choices. One evening, Richard Brooks called me directly. His voice, usually so measured, carried a heaviness I'd never heard before. "Claire," he said, pausing longer than usual, "I raised my son better than this." "I'm ashamed of him." "Do what you need to do for Ella. Don't hold back." For a man who had always defended Adrian even when he shouldn't, it stunned me into silence. Gratitude and sorrow collided in my chest, but I only managed a quiet, "Thank you." Margaret, however, withdrew into silence. She stopped calling, stopped sending holiday cards, stopped showing up at Ella's school events. Through friends, I heard she couldn't face the whispers at her bridge club or the looks in the grocery store aisles. She was embarrassed not by me, but by the son she once bragged about. The fractures spread wider than I could have imagined. Custody became the battleground I refused to lose. Helena prepared every detail with surgical precision: Adrian's infidelity, his reckless spending, the viral videos, even the leaked recording where he dismissed our daughter as a distraction. In court, Adrian spoke softly, dressed carefully, his words polished with rehearsed sincerity. He painted himself as the devoted father. But Helena's cross-examination cut through it all. She slid a transcript across the table. "Mr. Brooks, can you explain this recording where you refer to your daughter as a distraction during a business retreat?" He fumbled, denied, tried to frame it as out of context, but the judge's expression never softened. When the gavel came down, awarding me full physical custody, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Adrian was granted limited visitation supervised until he proved stability. The look on his face as the decision was read was almost enough to erase years of anguish. Almost. The financial unraveling came next. The forensic accountant's report was meticulous. Adrian had been siphoning company funds for years: lavish dinners, gifts, weekend trips, all billed under client expenses. His company had no choice but to act. He was terminated quietly but firmly, without severance, without safety nets, without the golden parachute he had counted on. The house, our house, became another battlefield. He argued that his salary had paid the mortgage, that it was his by right. Helena reminded the court that my inheritance funded the down payment. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me the home clean and clear. Adrian walked away with nothing but debt. Word traveled fast in Tampa. Men who once called him for golf or invited him to weekend retreats stopped answering his calls. His name, once spoken with admiration, became radioactive. At the grocery store, I ran into his younger brother Luke, who pulled me aside, his eyes heavy with unease. "I don't know what to say," he admitted quietly. "Adrian's always been reckless, but I didn't think he'd sink this low." I can't be associated with him anymore. He's toxic. Hearing his own brother use that word told me just how far Adrian had fallen. Meanwhile, Alyssa had vanished. Rumors circled that she'd moved back in with her parents, unable to find work in the city. No firm wanted the liability of hiring the assistant who had become a viral scandal. The promises Adrian whispered to her had cost her everything, and now she was paying for them in silence. By year's end, Adrian was living in a cramped apartment in a rundown part of town. His once tailored suits were pawned off, his prized watches sold. He drove an aging sedan that coughed with every start. Consulting gigs came and went, each one shorter than the last, none of them enough to restore what he had lost. He was no longer the man who strutted into rooms with his chin high. He was a shadow of himself, a man who had traded everything real for illusions that dissolved in his hands. Ella adjusted better than I imagined. She asked me once, "Why doesn't Daddy live with us anymore?" I knelt in front of her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Because Daddy made choices that hurt our family," I explained gently. "And sometimes, when people make bad choices, they lose the good things they had." She thought for a moment before asking, "But we didn't lose, right?" I pulled her close. "No, sweetheart, we didn't lose. We're stronger now." At night, when the house was quiet, I thought about how Adrian had once told me I was nothing without him. He had said it with such certainty that I almost believed him. Now he was the one stripped bare alone in an empty apartment, while Ella and I filled our home with laughter again. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was as simple as standing in the ruins of what someone else built and realizing they were the architect of their own downfall. It had been months since the court finalized the divorce, granting me the house and custody of Ella. I thought the chapter was closed until one gray afternoon I came home from school, drop-off, and saw him waiting by the curb. Adrian leaned against a lamppost, the house behind me, a reminder of everything he had lost. His once polished suit hung loose on his thinner frame. His shoes scuffed his hair unkempt. The man who had once obsessed over appearances was nearly unrecognizable. My steps slowed as I approached my keys, clutched tight in my hand. "Claire," he said softly, his voice cracked, worn thin. "I know I shouldn't be here. I needed to see you one last time." I crossed my arms, not moving closer, the distance between us more than physical now. His words tumbled out quickly, as though afraid I'd cut him off. "I've lost everything. The job, the house. Alyssa's gone. My parents won't even return my calls. I live in a one-bedroom apartment with furniture from Craigslist. I eat noodles out of a pot for dinner." He shook his head, his voice breaking. "I don't even recognize myself anymore." I tilted my head, studying him. "And whose fault is that?" I asked evenly. His eyes filled with tears he didn't bother hiding. "I made mistakes. God, I know I did. But I loved you." "I still love you. Can't you see? You were always the one holding me together. Without you, I'm nothing." For years, he had told me I was nothing without him, that I couldn't survive on my own. Now here he was, stripped down to the truth, confessing that he was the one who had collapsed. "Do you think saying you love me erases what you did?" I asked, my voice sharp but calm. "Do you think it fixes the nights I sat alone at the dinner table while you lied about working late? Or the way you made me question my own sanity?" He stepped forward, desperation in his eyes. "Please, Claire, I'm begging you. Just give me another chance. We can rebuild. I'll be better this time." I shook my head slowly, steady in a way I never had been before. "No, Adrian. You had your chances. You had years of chances. And every single time you chose yourself. You chose her. You chose betrayal. His shoulders sagged, as if the last bit of strength had been pulled from him. "Then what do I do?" he whispered. "Tell me how to fix this. Tell me what I can do." I took a step closer, closing the space just enough that he could see the certainty in my eyes. "You can't fix this," I said quietly. "Because this isn't my destruction, Adrian. It's yours. You built it yourself, brick by brick, with every lie, every choice, every arrogant decision. And now, you get to live in the ruins." His face twisted pain and regret warring inside him, but I didn't wait to hear another plea. I turned and walked up the steps to the front door. Behind me, I heard a strangled sob, the sound of a man finally realizing he had nothing left to bargain with. My key turned in the lock, but before I stepped inside, I glanced back once more. He was crumpled on the curb, his head buried in his hands. The same hands that once held power over me now looked small, empty, defeated. "You wanted to see me one last time," I said, my voice carrying across the quiet street. "There's your last look. Remember it." Then I closed the door, shutting him out for good. Inside, the house was warm with Ella's drawings taped on the fridge and the scent of dinner Paula had dropped off earlier. My world felt lighter, even as the weight of his presence still lingered outside. For days afterward, I thought about that moment on the curb, about how he had once stood tall in this very driveway, barking into his phone while neighbors watched with envy. Now, he was the object of pity, stripped of the respect he had demanded for so long. He called a few times after leaving messages that grew shorter and more desperate, but I never answered. Each voicemail was deleted without hesitation. I had already given him more years than he deserved. As the weeks passed, word spread about his downfall. Former colleagues whispered that no firm would touch him. The consulting work dried up, and the man who once strutted through boardrooms was reduced to begging for small contracts that never came. I ran into acquaintances who shook their heads when his name was mentioned. "Such a waste," they said quietly. "He did it to himself." They weren't wrong. One evening, standing on the back porch with the sunset bleeding across the bay, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Ella was inside humming as she colored her laughter drifting through the screen door. The life Adrian thought I couldn't build without him was unfolding around me, steady, honest, full of love. He had been wrong all along. I wasn't nothing without him. Without me, he was nothing. It was months before I saw him again. I was leaving the grocery store one evening, bags balanced against my hip when I caught a glimpse of him near the parking lot entrance. For a second, I thought I was mistaken. The man standing there looked so much older than the one I had married, thinner. His hair threaded with gray, his clothes worn and loose. He turned, and when his eyes met mine, the recognition stung. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it, his jaw trembling. Without a word, he turned and walked away, his figure shrinking against the row of cars, until he disappeared. In that moment, I realized how completely the world had shifted. Adrian was no longer the man who filled rooms with his voice, who strutted through meetings as though they were built for him. He had become a shadow, a cautionary story people whispered about, but never invited close. The downfall had not only stripped him of wealth and status, it had taken the illusion of control he once clung to so fiercely. Watching him walk away without a fight, I understood he had nothing left to stand on. The community that once admired him now spoke of him only in hushed tones. At school pickup, I overheard parents murmuring that he had tried and failed to secure another job. At the bank, I caught a glimpse of his name on a foreclosure notice pinned behind the counter. Even his own brother had cut him off, and the invitations that once cluttered our calendar no longer had his name on them. He was in every sense an exile in the city where he had once thrived. Meanwhile, my own life was regaining shape and color. I had launched the marketing consultancy I once dreamed of, and to my surprise, it grew quickly. Clients valued my eye for detail, but also the steadiness I carried into every room, forged by survival. Ella filled our home with laughter and curiosity, her drawings taped proudly to the refrigerator. Paula remained close, a constant reminder that not all bonds break under strain. Step by step, the house no longer felt haunted by Adrian's presence, but alive with our own rhythm. But justice was not just about survival, it was about truth. And the truth had spread far beyond our neighborhood. The recording of his drunken brag at a company retreat had become a viral punchline. His name was threaded into hashtags that turned him into a joke across the country. What he once feared most had come true. The mask he wore so carefully had been ripped away, leaving the world to see him as he really was. For years, I had felt like my pain existed in silence. Now the silence was his, while my voice carried further than I ever intended. The final court dates sealed everything he had tried to hold on to. The house was mine, clean and clear. Custody remained firm in my favor. Financial judgments left him buried in debt with no way out. When the judge's gavel came down for the last time, I felt an invisible weight lift from my shoulders. It was not joy, I felt it was clarity. The truth had been spoken in the one place where spin and charm could not disguise it. Friends told me later that Adrian had been spotted in rundown apartments, moving every few months when rent grew too heavy. His car, once a sleek import, was replaced with an old sedan that coughed smoke as it pulled out of parking lots. He was seen sitting alone at diners, folding coupons, avoiding eye contact. People who had once envied him now pitied him, their tones laced with distance. The man who had mocked my strength, who had dismissed my sacrifices, was left with nothing but the ruins he built himself. One afternoon, Ella asked me, "Mommy, is Daddy okay?" The question cut deeper than she knew. I sat with her on the porch swing, brushing a curl from her forehead. "Daddy isn't okay right now," I said gently. "He made choices that hurt our family, and those choices have consequences. But you and I, we are okay. We are stronger together." She nodded, her small hand gripping mine tightly, and I knew that was the truth she needed most. For years, Adrian tried to make me doubt myself, to twist loyalty into chains and silence into submission. In the end, he became the author of his own ruin. Justice had not been about revenge in the way he feared. It was about balance, about showing him that dignity cannot be stolen, only surrendered. He had surrendered his, and I had reclaimed mine. The evening air on the porch was warm and still, carrying the faint scent of salt from the bay. I sat with a cup of tea cooling between my palms, watching the sky shift through shades of pink and amber. For the first time in years, there was no weight pressing on my chest, no anxious thought of where Adrian was or what lie he might tell next. The quiet no longer felt heavy. It felt like freedom. Inside, the house had changed as much as I had. The walls were painted fresh, the furniture rearranged, every trace of Adrian's presence carefully stripped away. Ella's drawings covered the refrigerator, her books spilled across the coffee table, and her laughter filled the rooms like sunlight spilling through windows. What was once a house haunted by betrayal had become a home again, a place where we could breathe and begin anew. Adrian's shadow lingered in town, though only as a whisper. I heard through friends that he moved often chasing work that never lasted, showing up thinner and grayer each time. He was no longer feared or admired, only pitied. The man who once claimed I couldn't survive without him had been reduced to someone I barely recognized, living in the ruins of his own choices. I didn't need to confront him again. The world had already delivered the justice he thought he could outrun. It would be easy to say I felt nothing for him, but the truth is more complicated. There were years when I loved him deeply, years when I believed we were a team. Those memories don't vanish, but they no longer have the power to wound me. What I feel now is not anger. It is distance, the kind that comes from closing a door you know will never open again. I had once believed strength meant holding everything together at any cost, even when it was breaking me apart. I see now that real strength was in knowing when to stop carrying what was never mine alone. Letting the marriage burn was not failure, it was survival. It was the choice that gave Ella a mother who could stand tall, and it gave me back the voice I had almost lost. Ella thrived in the new life we built. She grew bolder, her questions sharper, her laughter brighter. One evening, after we cooked pancakes for dinner and curled up on the couch, she looked at me and said, "Mommy, you're really strong." Those words meant more than any victory in court, more than the headlines or the whispers. She saw me not as the woman who had been betrayed, but as the woman who had risen. Looking back now, I understand that betrayal didn't just take something from me, it returned something too. It gave me the chance to remember who I was before I shrank myself to fit someone else's shadow. It showed me that dignity isn't granted by another person. It's something you choose to claim even in the hardest moments. I no longer ask if I should have left sooner or if I wasted too many years. Regret has no place here. Every sacrifice, every heartbreak, every night spent doubting myself led me to this porch, to this peace, to the life I hold now. And that is enough. As the sun slipped below the horizon, I whispered a truth I once thought I'd never believe. I am free. Free of his control, free of the weight of lies, free to live on my own terms. That is the justice I carried out, and that is the justice that endures. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke to you most deeply. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to hear more true family stories of dignity and resilience, stay connected here.